the recording. And Committee Chair, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines. I'm the chair of the California Board of Accountancy's Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, and I'd like to call our meeting to order. I'd like to note that CBA members may view any committee meeting that they do not sit on only as an observer and will remain as an attendee until their scheduled committee meeting, at which time they will be moved to the participants panel. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Ms. Reed to take roll call and establish a quorum. When Ms. Reed calls your name, unmute your microphone and state your name. Please remember to mute your microphone once you have stated your name.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines, present.
Dan Jacobson.
Here.
Dee Dee Owens.
Present.
Ariel Pay.
Present.
Katrina Salazar.
Katrina Salazar, present.
And Michael Savoy.
Savoy here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
I would like to thank CBA staff and the solid team for their assistance in facilitating this virtual meeting. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. Before we convene, please be advised that the meeting is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-29-20. Members of the public interested in participating in the meeting must join the meeting via WebEx. Information and instructions are posted on our website. All lines are currently on mute. As I facilitate this meeting to allow for proceeding in an orderly manner, lines will remain on mute until I direct staff to open them for public comments. I will announce when we are accepting public comments on the various issues, and staff will open the lines as appropriate. 5 minutes will be allotted to each individual providing comments. I would also like to remind committee members and others speaking during the meeting to please use the raise hand feature if you wish to make a motion, ask a question, or make a comment. This approach is necessary to facilitate the meeting and ensure the committee has the opportunity to complete its necessary business. I appreciate everyone's understanding. At this time, we will move to agenda item 1, which is public comment for items not on the main meeting agenda. The moderator will provide general instructions and then open it up for public comment. Moderator, please proceed.
This is the moderator. Thank you. I've opened the Q&A at the request of the committee. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Type "I would like to make a comment" and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Committee Chair, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to turn off the feature? And you're muted.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I would like to proceed with agenda item number 2, which is the approval of the November 21st, 2019 minutes. If any member would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the November 21st, 2019 EPOC meeting, please do so by using the raise hand feature and wait to be called upon. So is there a motion to accept the minutes? I see Mr. Savoy, your hand is raised.
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Salazar?
I make a motion to second the minutes.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to ask for members' comments on the meetings. Are there any additional comments or discussion from EPOC members? If so, please use the raise hand feature. Once I call on you, unmute your microphone and make your comment. Seeing no hands, I'd like to now turn it over to the moderator to ask if any members of the public would like to make a comment.
Thank you. This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Type, I would like to make a comment and send it to all panelists. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Reed to call, and I would like to call for the vote.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Abstain.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Abstain.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
and Michael Savoy.
Yes.
And the motion carries.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to move on to agenda item number 3, discussion and possible action regarding modifications to the denial of a retired status license application pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 5070.1, which will be presented by Dominique Franzella, Enforcement Chief. Mr. Franzella, please begin your presentation.
Good morning and thank you. So for this item, the CBA is being asked to direct staff to explore necessary changes to the retired status licensure approval denial process to allow an individual with a permanent restricted practice order to be approved for a retired status license. As highlighted in the item, as it relates to the retired status, the CBA sponsored legislation in 2011 that established a process whereby the CBA could create a process for individuals to apply for and receive a retired status license. Though the legislation took effect in 2012, the regulations that implemented the retired status took effect January 1, 2014. As it relates to the restricted practice order, while the CBA had developed and used a model for a restricted practice via stipulated settlements, no such provision was provided that allowed the CBA to seek a permanent restriction as part of a proposed decision prepared by the CBA or an administrative law judge. And the CBA, through its sunset review process in 2015, secured that the provision in law for a permanent restricted practice. Recently, the CBA considered a petition request for a reduction of penalty associated with a licensee who had been on probation but was tolling as the licensee lived out of state. The disciplinary order also included a permanent restricted practice order. The licensee was requesting to have the petition granted to terminate probation and have his license placed in a retired status. One question raised regarding this was the ability to grant the individual's request. The question centered on the language included in the enabling statute for the retired status license found in Business and Professions Code, Section 5070.1, which is attachment 1 to your materials. But in pertinent part, it's subdivision C, and it states that the board shall deny an applicant's application to place a license in a retired status if the permit is subject to an outstanding order of the board, is suspended, revoked, or otherwise punitively restricted by the board, or subject to the disciplinary action under this chapter. And the primary language being looked at here is that bold section of outstanding order of the board. So staff engaged legal counsel regarding the approval denial process of applications for a retired status license when licensees have completed the probation period but have a permanent restricted practice order. Based on counsel's input, as presently provided for in the Business and Professions Code, the CBA would need to deny an application for retired status if the licensee has a permanent restricted practice order, as this order is still considered an outstanding order of the CBA. So as noted in the item, when the CBA sponsored the retired license status provisions back in 2011, the CBA wasn't commonly using the permanent restricted practice order. And the purpose behind these orders is to provide the CBA with a tool to ensure consumer protection while balancing licensees' ability to continue to practice and earn a livelihood with continued practice in areas not deemed to put the public at an increased or continued harm. So over time, the CBA has just over 100 licensees that have a permanent restricted practice order. However, that number tends to grow as part of the enforcement process, and the restricted practice order is a fairly common tool members have been utilizing during the enforcement process. So while the permanent restricted practice order is still a form of discipline, it does seem reasonable that should licensees ever seek to retire the license, the CBA should be able to approve such an application. Should the same licensees, however, seek to restore the license to active status, any such prior permanent restricted practice order would be reinstated. Any permanent removal of a permanent restricted practice order should require licensees to appear before the CBA through the petition process. So staff are recommending that the CBA direct staff to explore necessary changes to the retired status licensure approval denial process to allow an individual with a permanent restricted practice order who's completed probation to be approved for a retired status license. If the CBA directs staff to explore the necessary changes, staff will work with legal counsel on possible steps to take modifications to the retired license status provisions, whether via statute, regulation, or both, and present these to the CBA at a future meeting. So at this time, I'd like to turn discussion back over to the chair, and I will do my best to answer any members' questions.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella. At this time, I would like to open it up for comments and discussion or a motion from members of the committee. And I see Ms. Salazar's hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, my question is, should the recommendation be given to the staff to explore necessary changes? Will staff also look at or explain to the board the framework between sort of our two-tier licensing? Because that's the only area, it seems to me, that a restricted practice takes our license for audit and makes it very similar to our general license. And forgive the terminologies because those are not the technically correct terms. But that would just be my ask, that when the staff, if they make a recommendation, that they also sort of explain why that option for allowing it, if it was considered. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yes, in general, I do support the recommendation to evaluate it. My question is, do we need to allow for this specific discipline, or is it simply a matter of changing our language? And is that even an option?
Mr. Franzella, would you like to respond to her question?
Thank you. I'll do my best to answer your question, Ms. Salazar. First, I think it's important to note, the majority of the restricted practice orders that are imposed on the board by the board tend to be for audits or certain attestation functions. It's not limited to that. The board has issued restricted practice orders in the area of tax for a very specific type of service. They've also done it for charitable trusts, estate planning, and so the restricted practice order doesn't really affect that whole A versus G license type necessarily. And even within the practice orders, sometimes it's just audits, which means the individual can still do levels of attestation features such as reviews or agreed upon procedures and things of that nature. So I don't know if it has a bearing per se for the A versus G. I think the primary issue here that we're looking to address is the individual. We needed to create a mechanism to ensure that when this individual came off of probation after serving what was a reasonable amount of time for the board to have an active oversight of their license, that they've agreed to not do this type of work. And yet, And so basically it's adjusted their license, and it could take them from what used to be an A to a level of a G license in some ways, but it could be in other areas as well. And while it is still, like council has indicated, an order of the board, an outstanding order of the board, the individual has otherwise completed all the terms and conditions the board has set upon them and believes the person is fit to practice and has a fully restored license with that limited exception. And it really is not, shouldn't be viewed as a punitive ongoing measure. And if the individual, after a period of time and meets certain requirements, seeks to retire their license, they're presently prohibited from doing so. And they'll either have to go delinquent and eventually cancel out, or they have to keep paying the fees in order to avoid that issue. So it's really just addressing that. But should they come back, they should have their permanent restricted practice order reinstated, unless they take time to petition the board, in which case they can demonstrate a fitness for practice and whether or not they're safe to practice, and the board can make that decision and reinstate them with or without that restricted practice. So I hope that answers your question, Ms. Salazar.
If the chair permits, it absolutely does. Thank you for reminding me of all the nuances in our history of disciplinary cases. So thank you. That made perfect sense to a very unclearly worded question.
But a helpful question. With that, would someone like to make a motion for action on this item? Ms. Owens, I see your hand raised.
Yes, I will make the motion to direct the staff to explore changes to the retired status.
Thank you, Ms. Owens. Do I have a second for Ms. Owens' motion? Mr. Pei.
Yes, I'll second.
Thank you for that second. And are there any additional comments or discussion from EPOC members? If so, please use the raise hand feature. Once I call on you, you can unmute your microphone and make your comment. All right, I am seeing no hands raised. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to the moderator if any members of the public would like to make a comment.
This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Committee Chair, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, Ms. Reed, will you call for the vote?
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
and Michael Savoy.
Yes.
And the motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, committee members, for your work on this. And thank you, Mr. Franzella, for bringing this to the committee. And we look forward to hearing your report back in the future. So at this time, I would like to move on to closing business. Are there any agenda items that members would like to consider for the next meeting? Please use the raise hand feature if you would like to speak. All right, seeing none, I want to thank you all for your work, and this meeting is adjourned.